Hey guys, this is GameCow. Welcome to another Pokemon Trading Card Game History video. It's a history from the future this time round because we're into Paradox Rift, home of the Ancient and Future cards. Future stuff like the Iron Moth over here is more based on mobility and some damage augmenting type stuff. As you can see, the thermal reactor over here works when it shifts from bench to active, and the ancient stuff is kind of like self-damage a little bit with the Slitherwing, but it's more just like higher HP stuff that potentially tries to beat your face in a bit more primordial style, I suppose. Roaring Moon EX is probably the biggest example that we'll get into that just straight up knocks out one of the opponent's Pokemon. So yeah, the ancient stuff ain't messing around as far as damage goes. There are actually other specific support cards for Ancient and Future in here as well though, but the Booster Energy capsules being the biggest examples, and these emphasize the play styles a fair bit here, where, you know, Future Booster Energy doesn't give you a retreat cost anymore and makes you do more damage, but only on a Pokemon with a Future tag. The Ancient one, on the other hand, gives you a lot more HP and prevents you from being affected by special conditions, so that's kind of cool. And yeah, it sort of emphasizes a very distinct playstyle between the two of them. Otherwise, many of the support cards can be used by other stuff too. We only really have a couple of examples in this first set, but like Earthen Vessel over here actually doesn't require you to play an ancient deck in order to use, which is pretty cool. Turo Scenario is another one. We will talk about what these all do as we go along here. One of the other big things that we have from this set is the technical machines. These do drop off at the end of the turn, but they are tool cards which allow you to do extra attacks, and oh boy, these attacks are good. We'll be talking a lot about those as well. This is another Eternal format, much like Silver Tempest was, in the sense that it was 6 months long, because the only set that came out in the meantime was Paldean Fates. We were waiting for a rotation, basically, and yeah, this set has maybe half a dozen brand new cards, as most of these are reprints, but you've got some silly stuff like Kilowattrel trying to support United Wings, not really doing a very good job of it though, because it doesn't have United Wings itself, Boo, Hiss, etc. Yeah, there's like one card in here that's kind of noteworthy, which is the Moonlit Hill. This was supposed to be out like 5 months ago or something, looking at the Japanese stuff. I think it might have been like a gym or a league promo type thing in Japan, or something along those sorts of lines, where it was just like never managed to be included in any of the sets over here. Genuinely, it was meant to be around the Paldea Evolved sort of time, so it's kind of unfortunate that it took this long. And like, from my own sort of thinking on this, it doesn't actually turn out to be that good anymore. But I think that might just be a consistency thing for God of War. But specifically, it is a God of War support thing. Decks in Japan actually did play one copy of this card, and yeah, it's a shame that we never really had it in time. There is a lot to talk about from the set itself, however. We do have a fair bunch of things here. Unlike last time, it is a lot more evenly distributed than it was before, because there's actually quite a few cards which I would consider meta relevant this time round, and not quite so many that have to be put into the drafting tier. This is the point in draft where it's going to start getting a little bit complicated without having actually played it beforehand to really see what is and isn't great. Because at this point, especially after opening the reprint set over here, which has all the stuff like Charizard, like Pidgeot, in Pidgeot is actually just a like secret rare down here, but it does exist and is easy enough. I say easy enough, it is possible to pull, so we may be at the point here where we're just like actually playing just slightly less consistent meta decks at this point. So I don't know if any of the regular things are actually going to be good enough anymore. But I will still talk about the stuff that I think is interesting. I'll talk about the ones that I think could have a place here. And yeah, we'll have some fun as we go. So, on to the actual meta stuff here. I think it is probably best just to go in like the sequential order as normal, but I do want to speak about Iron Hands before I do so. Iron Hands EX is a 230 HP basic lightning Pokemon, so it's very good for Miraidon and anything that can splash one lightning energy in, because it only takes one lightning for the attack that everybody was doomsaying about here. Ampu very much does 120 damage for a lightning and 3 colorless, but if you take a knockout with this, you take an additional prize card. Automatically, that effect is obviously insane. We have seen this for a very long time now in bits and pieces as we go, and just about every single one of these has been playable at some point, even if not in the highest tier of deck. Think Lugia EX from the Plasma series. Probably the weakest one would have been something like the what's he called? Guzzlord from Gen 7, but that was because like Dartbox just wasn't as strong as the other decks around at the time. If that Guzzlord connected and got an extra prize, it was still just insane. But like Arceus Dialga Palkia obviously is another much more broken example, but is still really disgusting, and like it can never be discounted how powerful taking extra prizes is. This card does see a ton of play. It will be in quite a few different decks, but not every deck can play it, and that is something which is worth noting here. Some of the more prominent ones immediately were Lost Box, and of course Miraidon could play it. Bat's Caliber was the other major one that could play it, because they used acceleration. You could just accelerate like 3 waters to this thing, as well as the 1 lightning, and we do have energy search stuff now that is very powerful for this as well. So yeah, there's a few decks. There are more as we go forward, but some of them will need extra cards from the future, to actually make it work. But very, very powerful card. Probably the standout card from the set, and definitely one to talk about first. Mewtwo as a card here is like not amazing, but it does see meta play at this current point in history, which is Stellar Crown, because of the fact that it is a Terra Pokemon. Right now, the fact that it's a Terra Pokemon actually makes it kind of bad, but it's supposed to combine with the Xatu here, so we'll talk about the two in tandem. The Mewtwo is a Lightning Terra Pokemon, which is why it sees play now, because it can be searched with Miraidon, and is a basic Terra Pokemon. That's relevant for the Stellar Crown stuff. But here it's a disadvantage, because we'd much rather this be a Psychic Pokemon, so that we could use this with Gardevoir. Basically all it does that is necessary to know is the Photon Kinesis attack here. For 2 Psychic Energy, it does 10 damage plus 30 for every Psychic Energy that is on all of your Pokemon. If we could use this with Guardy, we could load this with like 10 energy, or 11 energy technically, because it's 230 HP, right? And then we would do 340 damage and just be absolutely disgusting. Unfortunately, we have to do it a bit slower than that, because we can only use Gardevoir on Psychic type Pokemon. The Xatu is the ideal way of doing the stuff here, I think, where it's 100 HP, so it's not Level Ball searchable. Level Ball is rotating though, so we'll have to get to that later. But its Clairvoyant Sense ability lets you attach a basic Psychic from your hand to one of your bench Pokemon once per turn, and if you do so, it draws 2 cards. You may remember this being on a 3-prizer in the past, because this was Shadow Rider's ability, one of the strongest acceleration abilities at the time, and it definitely did see play. This one, not so much, unfortunately. It doesn't help that the Natu is only 50 HP, but it's also just like, it's one of those abilities where it is really, really powerful, but I think we just do better in the current format, right? Like, Gardevoir also accelerates Psychic. Yes, it puts damage counters down, but those damage counters are often a benefit for the card itself, and it's just like, it's better than this. There's not really any way around it. Maybe when the Refinement Curlier rotates in the 2025 season, we might be able to see this actually like played in that aspect. And don't get me wrong, it does see some play from time to time, but it's not really a meta deck, and with a crazy ability like this, you might be a bit surprised at that. But that's the world of Pokemon. Sometimes stuff that seems excessively strong just doesn't end up getting there. I think the complicated setup is probably the reason why. A lot of decks, especially with all the Paradox Pokemon being basics, I think at this point, we're starting to get to the point where if your stage 2 is not like super overwhelming, these setup Pokemon just have a really hard time competing, which is a shame, but it is how it be. Jirachi was a much needed injection into the format to counteract Lost Box stuff. Sableye has been incredibly gross for a very long time now, and the Stellar Veil ability lets you block that, and a couple of other things. You prevent all damage counters from being placed on your benched Pokemon by effects of attacks used by your opponent's basic Pokemon. It is only attacks, it does not stop damage counter placement from something like Holucha, which is a bit of a problem, but, well, not really, but you know what I mean. It's like, it's a limitation, and it doesn't prevent stuff from evolutions, which isn't super relevant at the moment, but it will become important later on. Otherwise though, yeah, this is totally fine. Like, its attack is useless, but it's specifically there for evolving decks that have a hard time against a very fast Lost Mine, which is possible to do as early as like turn 2 going first. So yeah, very, very strong card to have around, but it's specific to like really one, maybe two things at most. I can't even think of anything else that puts damage counters as an attack right now that would be relevant. So yeah, it's Sableye and basically nothing else. But hey, I suppose Shadow Rider, Calyrex, the base form Astral Barrage, does that, so that's kind of funny, but you basically never see that used, so yeah. Minior is a pretty good check to the rising importance of the Snorlax stall deck. We deliberately avoid it ourselves because we just do not like playing that sort of thing, and it's miserable for all concerned, because like if we don't like it, and we definitely don't want to make everybody else miserable playing it, you know. But Block Snorlax is still a huge thing in the format. It did do very well in some tournaments where it was less respected, and the Far-Flying Meteor here effectively works like a jet energy. If you attach to the Minior on the bench, it can be switched in to the active spot, so that gets around the retreat blocking of Snorlax. Gravitational Tackle is also like tailor-made to beat that Snorlax. It has 150 HP at a 4 retreat cost. For any 1 energy, this does 20 for each colorless in the opponent's active's retreat cost, so you just make it so that it deals 160 because it hits for weakness as well, so like at 1 shots that Snorlax. There are ways that deck can get around it, like Bravery Charm, and one we'll talk about in the trainer section here, but for the most part, yeah, it's very nice that way. And the fact of it doesn't just do this once, if it gets gusted away and you attach another energy, you just get to bring it back in again. So yeah, this is tailor-made to beat that deck, which is funny but kind of necessary too. I'm not sure if it actually saw a lot of play, but Tapu Koko EX is kind of neat. It's a 210 HP Lightning Pokemon that has the Vengeful Shock attack. For Lightning and a colorless, it does 30, but it does 90 more with Auto Paralysis if the opponent's KO'd one of your guys last turn, right? Specifically from damage by an attack, so it does not work if they damage counter spread you or something. But yeah, 120 with Auto Paralysis, definitely not to be scoffed at. It is of course very easily searchable with Miraidon, and it's a low energy attack that you could use there. Again, I don't know if it actually did see play, but it's worth noting for that nonetheless. Extreme Current is also like fine, I guess it could KO a Mew or something, but you're mostly using it for the shock here. Morpeko actually does see a little bit of play right now, which is kind of hilarious. I believe the Roaring Moon deck in this set actually uses it. If it has no energy attached to it, the 70 HP basic can retreat for free, and that's mostly why it's used. But it's also like a good pressure attacker against the evolving basics to start off with. For 2 Darkness Energy, Energizer Wheel does 70, and it moves 2 Darkness Energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. So you get to KO an evolving basic in the active spot, move 2 Darkness Energy to the Roaring Moon, and then next turn, if this is somehow still in the active spot, it doesn't have any energy, so it doesn't have a retreat cost, which is pretty good. Armarouge EX kind of works with the Arceus stuff, actually. That's kind of weird. I remember Pepper played Arceus Rayquaza VMAX before that used the Armarouge to shift fire energy from bench stuff to active in order for Rayquaza to do like a ton of damage with its discard all fire like attack. This one takes a bit of a different line. It's a 260 HP Stage 1 EX that, if it's at full HP, takes 80 less damage from the opponent's attacks, which is pretty cool in its own right. But then, for any 2 energy, it does 40 plus 40 for each fire energy that is on this Pokemon. So if you can picture it, we have the original Armarouge that can shift energy from bench to active. There's Magma Basin that once per turn can accelerate 2 benched fire Pokemon. Does put damage counters on them, but if you do it to the non-EX Armarouge, then you don't actually put damage counters on this guy. And then, yeah, he takes like a bazillion less damage, which is kind of crazy. You could then use this with stuff like Switch and Turo Scenario that we'll talk about later to essentially keep this thing at full health at all times. It's pretty great. Or Cheryl could be a thing you could use here as well. So pretty neat stuff all around. Toadscroll, I think, does see 1 or 2 tournament success like things here and there. Its Slime Mold Colony is the only reason to use it, but it means that cards in the opponent's discard pile cannot be put into their hand by abilities or trainer cards, which is pretty useful. It does prevent the... later on it would prevent something like Night Stretcher, but it also just like blocks the odd control card here and there, which is situationally useful enough to be like, yeah, we could do this. So it's kind of cool. If you ever see Darkrai V-Star, then I guess it would stop that too, which is pretty funny. Or Regidrago nowadays. So yeah, it's kind of cool stuff that way. So yeah, very niche use, but still competitively used, so there you go. Cloth is a very funny deck that we're going to see this time round. There's some quote-unquote support for it in here too, which is pretty neat. For 2 colorless energy, Unhinged Scissors does 30, but it does 160 more if this Pokemon is affected by a special condition. It's only got 120 HP, but you can self-poison and actually self-burn with the Spicy Season Curry that came out like forever ago. It burns you and then heals 40. So even if you don't have damage to heal, the fact of it burns you means it still does something, so that's kind of neat. Yeah, and it does like 170 with a double turbo energy on a fighting Pokemon, so it hits a really good weakness at the moment as well. This is paired with the Hisuian Electrode, which for 0 energy did 100 for every special condition on the Electrode. And if you could burn and poison it, we'll get to the poison in a minute, then that lets you do 200 on a grass Pokemon, so it can KO Charizard in 1 hit. And that was the whole thing. If you didn't play against those decks, it could be kind of difficult, but it's still a high pressure deck that can hit for like 170 on turn 1. So it's pretty spooky. Screamtail is the first of the ancient Pokemon over here. For some reason it only has 90 HP. If you know this thing in the video games, you know that it's all bulk and no damage. So like, why does it only have 90 HP? I guess it's just a big Jigglypuff, but it's a really big Jigglypuff, so I don't know. They've decided it's going to be low HP in the TCG though, and whatever. I mean, it works with its attacks, so sure. For 1 Psychic and 1 Colorless, Roaring Scream does 20 to one of the opponent's Pokemon for each damage counter on this Pokemon. You couldn't sculpt a better card to give Gardevoir at this point, because like you put 4 energy on this thing, it gets to 8 damage counters on it, and then you snipe 160, which is pretty great. If you put the Ancient Booster Energy capsule on it, you would get to 150, so you could technically snipe up to 280, which would be enough to KO Pidgeot, so that's kind of awesome. Most of the time you're going to play Bravery Charm if you're going to play anything that way though, so you're capped at like 240, but let's face it, 240 is still a really, really good snipe number. Kinda nuts, to be honest. Yeah, so this gives the Gardevoir deck an extra dynamic where now it can hit for significant bench damage as well. And if you have to start benching Manaphy against Gardevoir, you know that something is spectacular in that list. Brute Bonnet is the card that mostly is paired with Cloth, but is supposed to work as a general Ancient thing. If you have an Ancient Booster Energy Capsule on the Bonnet, then you can leave both active Pokemon poisoned. However, if you're in an Ancient deck and you can use the Ancient Booster Capsule on the active as well, then you would not get poisoned, because the capsule prevents you from losing your status condition stuff. So that's kind of neat. Its attack is pretty bad, which is a shame because Dark Weakness is still pretty good to hit, but whatever, it's fine. We've got other Dark attackers in the package to work with, which we will talk about in a little bit. Slitherwing is sometimes usable. It's not like the strongest thing, but again, it's to hit for weakness sometimes. 140 HP, but it does 90 to itself, so it's kind of awkward that way. But for 2 fighting energy, it does 120 plus burn, so that would be 260 after weakness, which is enough to KO most of the stuff. Like, it wouldn't KO Miraidon with Bravery Charm on it. It would be 10 HP short, but it's enough to KO a lot of stuff that way. Like, even Raikou and things will fall to that. So there's a lot of stuff in the Miraidon deck it will hit, and if you have the capacity to play Fighting Energy, which maybe not this set, but next set the Ancient decks will be able to do, it's pretty solid. Sandy Shocks is the fighting type that you're supposed to try and use for Ancient stuff, but ultimately didn't go like too far, but I think it did get used in some early Roaring Moon decks in the next set, so we'll talk about it anyway. If your opponent has 4 or fewer prize cards remaining, you can accelerate a basic fighting energy from the discard pile to this Pokemon. It's a 220 HP EX, so it is maybe a bit awkward that way, but it does do 200 damage for 2 fighting and a colorless. Can't attack in consecutive turns, but kind of whatever, right? 200 with weakness KOs anything that's weak to fighting, so that's pretty good. And yeah, I mean, the idea is that Raging Bolt did also use fighting energy, or does use fighting energy, and does require a bunch of discards off the field in order to do its thing. So if you could accelerate with this, then you could fuel that and do a lot of damage. It's kind of awkward, but it's still reasonable nonetheless. Iron Bundle is the first of the future cards we'll talk about here. This card is kind of nuts, to be honest. It's 100 HP basic, so again, not level ball searchable for this 6-month period, but that's totally fine. It's a water type, so it is Iridis searchable if you're playing that sort of way. It's pretty good. And if you discard this Pokemon from your bench, you may force the opponent to switch their active out. They get to choose what comes in, so it's not like a busted gust effect, but it also does kind of stop a lot of things that are just like, I'm gonna wall, say, with 1 Mimikyu in the active or something, or like, I'm gonna put up a Pokemon that only gives up 1 prize where all of my other stuff gives up the remaining 2, right? There's a lot of situations where just forcing the opponent to switch is actually really good, and having this on like a nest ball searchable card is fantastic. So yeah, it's always better to have this on like a Pokemon than it is to have it on an item, or even an item, like, or on, say, Rhyme kind of does this, but it's on a supporter. Definitely much better here. Frigibax is a weird one to note, but it's a better Frigibax than the ones we have already. It's 70 HP, it does still have 2 retreat unfortunately, but it draws a card for 1 energy, so this actually gets played as the new main Frigibax in Bats Caliber, so yeah. Goldengo is another cool one. I believe Pepper's going to be testing this on the Wednesday, so that should be pretty cool. 260 HP stage 1. That does have a couple of good gimme goals to go from. One's 50 HP with like a good Call for Family attack, and then the other one is a 70 HP one, so you can play like a 3-1 split, have more HP around, etc. This one draws a card once per turn, but if it's in the active spot, it draws 2 cards instead, which is obviously pretty useful. If you get, say, 3 of these in play, that's a pretty good amount of draw, and also Iono proofing, which is nice. And then Make It Rain is just about as powerful as it is in the actual video games, which is exceptionally, so that's good. For 1 Metal Energy, it does 50 for every basic energy that you discard from your hand. So this is where all of the like energy retrieval stuff comes back. Like Superior Energy Retrieval is nuts here, and you only take 1 energy to attack, so it's not as if you can like deny this just by, you know, KOing the stuff with energy on board. So it's really, really solid. There's a lot of good recovery that we can have for this. So yeah, super powerful card if you can get it set up. It's still rogue tier for the most part, but it has actually seen some pretty good results even recently, which is nice, right? It does still see tops, and that's kind of cool. Pokemon looks stupid though, I'm gonna just say it outright. Our last two Pokemon for the main part of the set here are Roaring Moon and Iron Valiant, as you would probably hope, because these are like the quote-unquote pseudos of the Paradox Mons. They're the 590 base stat total dudes. Roaring Moon is a 230 HP Darkness type ancient Pokemon with the Frenzied Gouging attack. Like, both of its attacks are for 2 Darkness and a colorless. We have ways of accelerating with this, and it isn't only Dark Patch, so yeah, we'll get to that as we do. Frenzied Gouging auto KOs the opponent's active Pokemon. Just, yeah, the only time we've ever seen that before is on Amazing Rare Yveltal, I believe, as just a straight KO the opponent's active. That took 5 energy though. Granted, it's not a 1 prizer, but like that took what, 2 Darkness, a Psychic, a Fire, and a colorless? No, it was 1 Darkness, Psychic, Fire, 2 colorless, because you could use Twin Energy with it. Point is, that effect is absurd. The catch is A, you're on the 2 prizer, and B, you do 200 damage to yourself if you KO the opponent's active. Woof. So you put yourself down at 30 HP, basically guaranteed to give up 2 prizes next turn. Even with the booster capsule, you would still only have 90 HP remaining, so it's not nearly good enough to be like, yeah. So this is your tactical nuke button, we shall say, where it's like you are engaging a 2 prize trade race here, and hopefully you're winning it. Calamity Storm for the same cost does 100 plus 120 if more damage if you discard a stadium from play. You actually get the choice, unlike most of these sorts of attacks which just discard the stadium and then do the extra damage if you discard one. You can choose to just do 100 here if you only need 100 damage. That's pretty useful. But also discarding stadiums in play can be really good to deny the opponent the benefits of your own stadium. These decks will basically always play 4 Pokestop, and even outside of that you could play like, I don't know, Mesagoza or Town Store or something like that. Town Store's a good one to get booster capsule out of the deck, right? So there are good stadiums that you would want to play that the opponent can benefit from, and you can just choose to discard them that way too. You want to play a bunch of stadiums for this as well, because this is your main attack for a lot of the game, and 220 is enough to KO a lot of the slightly lower HP total by EXs and stuff, right? Miraidon is only a 220 HP Pokemon, for example, so yeah, strong card. Iron Valiant is also a 220 HP Pokemon, and it's not weak to Dark, so it does actually need that damage boost. Kind of funny. This one is kind of cheesy and almost a one-set wonder. It sees like a singleton copy in some decks in more recent times, but it's basically only this set that it's good for, and that's because of cards rotating. Tachyon Bits, if it switches from the bench to the active once per turn, it will put 2 damage counters on one of the opponent's Pokemon. And that's basically all you need to read at this current point in time, but later on I think it's used for its attack as well, so 2 Psychic and a Colorless, 200 damage, can't attack in consecutive turns. So, the toxic game plan with this is to establish 3 or possibly 4 of them, and use every switching card known to man to get them in and out of the active spot, and do like 60 to 80 damage on the turn. And then there's still Medicham format, which can put 2 damage counters on one of the opponent's evolving things, and suddenly, oops, you're taking an extra turn and you get to do it again and again. The rotating card that's a problem here is Escape Rope, because we don't get to keep that, and therefore we lose too many of the switch cards for this thing to stay relevant. So it's basically a one-set thing. You might think its retreat cost is also a bit of a problem, but again, the Future Booster Energy capsule makes you retreat for free, so it actually does get to do its 1 retreat per turn as well. Jet Energy could be used, but I don't think actually sees play with this, so yeah. There's a bunch of trainer cards which are worth talking about here. We will just X over the capsules because we've already gone over them. But Counter Catcher comes back from Gen 7. If you're behind on prizes, you switch the opponent's Pokemon out. It's a Gust. Yeah, super powerful card, and obviously very strong for the control stuff. That's one potential difficulty about introducing a card like this, but sometimes it's a necessary evil, I guess. And like, this card is really, really strong. It allows you to play something like Arven and also just like tutor out your gusting stuff as well. Fantastic card for the evolution decks that do not tend to attack until like turn 3. Especially Gardevoir is a good one to note for this. And yeah, just in general, being able to have like a combat type card is what the era is defined by. So yeah, really strong. Earthen Vessel is our Professor's Letter, but it takes a discard to use. Oh no, right? This is stronger than Professor's Letter because that discard is often a benefit. Even if it's for like, you know, Iono, Finning, etc., like stuff that you no longer need in your deck, almost all of the time Earthen Vessel's discard is actually a benefit. Even if it could just be like discard an energy, get 2 more energy, and then use effects to accelerate energy. I can't imagine any of those, right? From the discard? Yeah, we'll talk about those in a sec. Techno Radar is a really good consistency card for the future stuff. Discard a card from the hand, search your deck for up to 2 future Pokemon, put them into the hand. So this replaces stuff like Nest Ball very handily. And I don't think there's a future Pokemon at the moment that I can't think of one immediately that has like a coming into play ability where like you bench it from your hand and it does something. But this obviously future-proofs, haha, the idea of that too, by putting them into the hand instead of automatically benching them like a Nest Ball would. So yeah, stupidly strong card to have for the deck. Loads of consistency off of that. Mailer is a pretty good card. I think this might be slightly better in draft than it is in the real game, but it's still played in the real game as well. If one of your Pokemon was knocked out during the opponent's last turn, by any means, you attach a basic fire from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon, and then draw until you have 6 cards in hand. It's clearly not as strong as Raihan, but I think Raihan might have been a little bit overbearing for what they wanted. So in this case, we're getting likely a draw 2 to 5, right? Is the thing for this instead. And it's only fire energy, but that's kind of good because we don't really have fire acceleration that's like stupendous at the moment. Magma Basin is the only one, but Magma Basin can't work on Dragon-type Pokemon. And spoilers, there is Dragon-type Pokemon using fire energy in the future, which is actually really good. So yeah, decent card. Professor Sada's Vitality is a heck of a card. This one is kind of like Melody, but even stronger. Choose up to 2 of your ancient Pokemon, attach a basic energy from the discard to each of them, and if you attached any energy this way, draw 3 cards. So obviously if you only have 1 energy, you only get 1 acceleration, but you know, Melody was still very well played. Yeah, this alongside Dark Patch are the 2 big ways that you get Roaring Moon attacking as early as the first turn. Actually, it's kind of ridiculous how quickly it can get going. So yeah, very powerful card. Professor Turo's Scenario might be familiar to anyone from Gen 6. Put one of your Pokemon in play into your hand. Discard all cards attached to that Pokemon. It is AZ, but this time it has a tag, which is why it isn't just a straight reprint, right? They could have reprinted AZ if they wanted to. Instead, they did this because it's a future card, and that might actually be relevant here and there, right? I think the ancient stuff cares more about having the ancient tag on their trainers, but this might still come up from time to time as well. So yeah. I did mention Moonlit Hill, but I didn't mention what it does. Once during each player's turn, that player may discard a basic Psychic from their hand, energy that is, in order to heal 30 damage from each of their Pokemon. I will say it is a very good heal. 30 damage is a lot to recover, and if you think about the Gardevoir deck again, it's mostly going to be on like one target, but if you've managed to get something to the bench, that's that you've accelerated to before. Say, I don't know, accelerate to your Mew in the active so you can pay retreat to get to the Gardevoir or the Zacian or whatever you're attacking with, then you will still get a heal off of that too. The reason I kind of cut this from my own build of this, apart from I was having some consistency issues and therefore wanted Artisan instead, the main reason is that you're already discarding Psychic Energy for Greninja to draw cards, as well as for Refinement to draw cards. And I'm just like, I don't actually think you will have enough basic Psychic Energy in hand to be able to facilitate this. So I'm not convinced it's that good, but it did see some top in play, and who am I to judge, right? It's fine. I just don't think the consistency was quite working for me. So yeah, personal flavor sort of thing, really. Defiance Fest is interesting. If you're behind on prizes, then the Pokemon this is attached to takes 40 less damage from attacks. It doesn't matter what stage the Pokemon is or anything like that. This is the opposite of Defiance Band, which lets you do 30 more damage, and usually that's going to be the much better effect rather than this. But tool removal is not the most straightforward of things to do at the moment. There's only like Lost Vacuum as a thing, and that's only one at a time as well. So like, there is a world where this actually comes into play, but I think for the most part, the next card is the one that sees a lot more play, because it's a fair bit more impactful with its effect. Luxurious Cape can only be attached to Roblox Pokemon. Okay, strictly not true, it can be attached to other stuff, but it only works on non-Roblox Pokemon. If it is attached, then it gets 100 extra HP, and if it gets KO'd by damage from an attack on the opponent's Pokemon, then they take an extra prize card. So it converts your non-EXs into EXs. You can really see the amount of, like, quote-unquote power creep between the two, where, like, plus 100 HP is obviously very significant. It just about makes it so that you're, at least for your basics and sometimes your stage 1s, most of the time not even that. It makes your basic Pokemon get up to EX HP levels, but your stage 1s and especially your stage 2s are still going to fall below it, which is just sad. But, you know, that's the state of stage 1 and stage 2s, I guess, with it there. Yeah, no, this is used in Snorlax. Makes a Snorlax 250 HP, very difficult to take out, and they have like pennies and Turos that they can use to pick up the Snorlax before it gets KO'd by damage, and you don't give up 2 prizes. So yeah, Penny especially is good because it puts this back into the hand. So you play like 4 of that, I think, first, and it's just kind of gross, you know. Sharon's Care, I think, is also possible there too, so blah. Then we finally have the TMs over here. So I mentioned the mechanic, it's a tool card, it drops off at the end of the turn it's attached, but it gives the Pokemon an extra attack that they can use. So we'll go in reverse order because I think it's like most to least useful-ish. Now, most useful is Evolution. This evolves 2 of your Pokemon from the bench for 1 energy, so that's pretty good. Obviously turns your basics into stage 1s, and then you can evolve into the stage 2 in your next turn, so that's really nice. The Turbo Energize searches your deck for up to 2 basic energy, attaches them to your bench Pokemon in any way that you like. There are some decks that will really appreciate this. I don't think maybe Miraidon is one of them, but something like Roaring Moon even could use this as an early game thing if they can't get themselves set up otherwise. They probably won't because I don't think they play Arven, but you know, just as an example, right? Any of these like basic attacking decks that take 3 energy or something to do will benefit from something like this. Devolution is like the complete opposite of the evolution stuff. It's very much like the ATM Rock, the ancient technical machine that was way back in Gen 3. For 1 energy, this devolves each of your opponent's Pokemon by putting the highest stage of the evolution into the opponent's hand. So if you've managed to spread a bunch of damage around, then you can devolve, you know, say for example with the Iron Valley and stuff, just you know, hedging bets here. You can just devolve all of the opponent's Pokemon back down. It's very nasty against rare candy stuff, and you will see decks like Charizard tech this in sometimes against other Charizard decks as a result. Finally, there's Blindside, which is weakest because it takes 3 energy to use, and is also kind of the most conditional. It does 100 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon that has damage counters already on them. So it's a bit difficult to actually make this live and also like work. There's a few ways, of course. Holucha is a pretty good one, and that can help you get to the bench stuff. The biggest place that this sees use, I think, is in Lost Box, because Cramorant doesn't have to pay any energy for any of its attacks, and I'm pretty sure this also counts Blindside, so it actually gets to use this for 0 energy, and that's obviously very powerful. So I think that's where it mostly sees use, but it's a really cool effect anyway, and like, it didn't really make sense to split it up, so talk about it up there anyhow. That is everything I would consider meta from this set, but as you see, there's a fair bit down here that is worth talking about as far as potential draft stuff goes, and maybe some of this could sneak in as an off meta if you wanted to be funky as well. You could probably do that. Gengar from the Paldean Fate set is interesting. It lets you switch your active with one of your bench once per turn. So this is similar to the Dragonite, but instead of having like 50 extra HP, this guy does have a good split line to go into in the future. There's a Gengar EX that could be good for draft. And also, it is a hard switch instead of retreat cost being 0, which is just objectively a better effect. So yeah, its attack is bad, but who really cares? Steelix is kind of fun. We've almost kind of wanted one of these sort of Earthquake style things because of stuff like that Talonflame, right, that wants damage counters on itself, but the Earthquake things in Scarlet Violet draft beforehand have been like a stage 2 or something, right? This is a 180 HP stage 1 that does 130 damage for a single energy and does 30 to each of your own benched Pokemon. So if you need the bench damage, and there is actually a card to talk about for the bench damage in the Durant over here, like, Steelix is pretty respectable. Durant only has 70 HP, but for 2 energy it does 20 for each damage counter across all of your Durants. So if you can get 3-4 Durants in play and Earthquake them down like a couple of times, you're going to be doing ungodly amounts of damage with this thing. If you can get all 4 of them down in Earthquake once, that is still 12 damage counters on your Durants, so they will do 240 here. You may think the 2 colorless in its cost is a bit prohibitive, but Mailer is in this set, and you could easily use a couple of fire energy with this because Steelix is so energy efficient, right? It only takes 1 metal, so you could easily put the extra energy in here. I mean, this is kind of a cool combo, so, you know, interesting to speak on. Paragon Z is cute. It is a coin flip card, which is the disadvantage for it. Its energized attack does 40 for each energy that's on this Pokemon. If you had sources of multiple energy, like, I don't know, reversal energy for example, then it can kind of boost itself up. But you do want to play a ton of basic energy with this because of Buggy Turbo. You have to flip a coin for it, and if you flip heads, you accelerate up to 4 basic energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. If you flip tails, though, you have to discard an energy from this thing. So it is very risky, but if you manage to get the heads on it, that's 160 damage immediately. And then, I don't know, again, behind on prizes, put the reversal energy on it, 7 energy, 280. Pretty good. Each one of your Paragon Zs would get to use this once per turn as well. So if you can use your draw engine stuff otherwise, and Revavroom would be a really good combination with this. If you can set up a couple of them and have a couple of chances to flip heads each turn, that's a lot of damage that you could potentially do. Just need some stuff to do in the early game, so yeah. Lantern is another one of these reversal / luminous energy cards. Only 120 HP, but it is a lightning type, so I guess there's some support with Miraidon and whatnot. 2 lightning and a colorless to do 80, but it does 120 more if there's a water energy attached to it. So kind of like Scovillain from before, but on a different typing. But it does 200. 200's enough to KO single prize stuff like all the time, so yeah. Excuse me, throat is not cooperating. Doesn't matter. Altaria has a throat-based move. Humming Heal lets you heal 20 from each of your Pokemon once during your turn. It's similar to the Garganical, but it only does it during your turn, not during, like, in between turns. So it heals only half as much. but it's still respectable. Light Pulse is like not the greatest, but I don't know, like 140 for 2 energy is fine. You'll get a couple of knockouts with that at the very least, and it also prevents effects of attacks during your opponent's next turn done to this Pokemon. So hey, you can't get Gouging Frenzied, right? Because it can't be automatically knocked up. So yeah, pretty respectable. Absol, I don't know if we need this kind of setup mon at this point, but Draw Awareness does a pretty respectable thing. Discard until you have 4 or fewer cards in your hand, and then draw until you have 5. So you could discard your entire hand if you really want to, which is pretty good. And some decks do want to play out of the discard more than their own hand, right? So there could be a world where this is useful. Its attack is not very good, but again, setup stuff, maybe it's okay. Frostlass EX is interesting. It's a 250 HP Grass Terror Pokemon, significant because of Charizard obviously. If it's in the active spot and gets KO'd, you flip for a coin, and if heads, your opponent only takes 1 prize for this instead of 2. And Frost Bullet for 2 water does 140 and then does 20 to one of the opponent's bench. We don't have bench barrier, once again, so that bench damage can be meaningful. And again, I think this is like a Bats Caliber card, or maybe Quavel, like both of those could accelerate enough to this to be reasonable. It's a bit frail for a Stage 1 EX, but it is respectable enough, I think, and the weakness might be relevant for draft. Latios and Deoxys are both cards for the Gardevoir archetype mostly. Deoxys you could maybe use with Xatu, but I'm pretty sure not so much. Latios only has 110 HP, and Deoxys only has 120, but they are basic, so it's kind of okay. For 2 Psychic and a Colorless, Latios does 180, then discards 3 from itself. So you're looking at this with Gardevoir, it does 180 for putting 60 damage from the discard to itself. It's then going to get KO'd, but 180 KOs like everything that's not an EX, so yeah. And then Deoxys does 120 for the free Psychic Energy, but it shifts all energy from itself to your bench Pokemon. So I don't think this one's as good, but it does preserve the energy in play, which means it might be better with Xatu than otherwise, because you could shift energy to something a bit more potent as the next attacker, and 120 still does reasonable numbers against evolving things, so like maybe it's passable. Garchomp EX, I think the only reason, there's 2 reasons, but like the only 2 reasons this can't see play in Standard is because we don't have like a good fighting type Garchomp to use with it, which is important because of the weakness here, but also like it just doesn't quite do enough by itself. And that sounds crazy when you actually look at the effects of the attacks, but yeah, hear me out here. It's a 320 HP Water Terror Pokemon, which means it's weak to Lightning, so it's weak to Miraidon. That's the huge #1 problem, because it's built on a fighting type deck, right? Because it takes fighting type energy and accelerates fighting type energy, but it's weak to Lightning and doesn't have a good split line. It's not got a retreat cost, so that's kind of cool. I guess you could Feather Ball for this if you wanted to. Could give you an excuse to play Irida in Garchomp deck as well, so I guess that's neat. For a single fighting energy, it does 160 damage, pretty efficient, and accelerates up to 3 basic fighting energy from your discard pile to your bench in any way that you like. Very strong effect. There is a Drillbur in format right now as well, which when benched from hand, it discards up to 3 lightning energy out of, 3 fighting energy out of your deck, so that's kind of neat. Sonic Dive also only takes any 2 energy. You discard 2 energy from this Pokemon, snipe 120 on one of the opponent's Pokemon, so if they don't have Mana Feed down, I guess that's kind of cool. You're not playing Twin Energy in this deck, but if you were, it would only snipe 100, but that's still respectable for 1 energy, to be fair. Yeah, it really is just a case of there's not a good chomp to like use this with. There is a Garchomp in format, but it's the Dragon type one that takes a Water and Dragon energy to attack, and it still only does 160, so like it's not even that great. Yeah, this one just suffers from not having a good partner like in line right now. Think like Gardevoir, the reason that's so good partly is because of the Curlier, but also like the current reason is because it has Gardevoir single prizer that's like one of its main attackers, right? This doesn't have anything like that. So like, what are we even accelerating energy to? It can't be really to other Garchomps, it's too efficient for that. So yeah, it just doesn't really have a home at the moment. If you liked the Electrode from 151, the Garbodor might be a better version of that if you've got the leftover Snorlax thing. For a single Darkness Energy, this 120 HP dude does 50 for each tool card that you discard from your hand. So you're no longer attaching them like you would with the Electrode to then discard them from the field, but you just have them directly from the hand, which probably is better. The Snorlax does put the energy, the leftovers from the discard to the hand directly, so you could do 200 for one energy, which is 20 more than the Electrode does. And it also has a little bit more HP, maybe that comes into play. Darkness is generally a better weakness to hit as well. I don't know. It's fine though. Like, I mean, you could use Arven and stuff as well. Town Store, right, searches out stuff from the deck, so you can get extra tool cards into your hand to do more damage if you need to. And if you can discard more than four tool cards, this actually just gets even stronger than the Electrode. And Electrode is capped by how many tools you can put into play, whereas this is unlimited damage works basically. So yeah, probably a better version of it. Still not good enough for standard though. Aegislash, I have heard this card has been played, but I don't believe it. I don't remember seeing it anywhere. It's a 150 HP stage 2 with an actual safeguard ability this time. Prevent all damage done to this... Actually, no, not even. It's just damage still, because we can't block effects. That would be too powerful, right? Prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's EX and V Pokemon. Woof. Not even Roblox either, so you don't get to stop Greninja. Its attack isn't even great, right? 120 for 2. Like, they can't make these attacks too strong, because otherwise this sort of thing would just get disgusting. But, like, yeah, why don't we have Safeguard on the stage 2 when this ability is on a basic Pokemon? Right? I don't get it. It does, however, have an EX, which between the two of them, you could probably do something pretty reasonable for draft. It's a free 30 HP EX with a single Metal Energy attack that does 70 for each prize you have taken. So it's like the opposite of Charizard EX, where Charizard gets stronger for every prize the opponent's taken. This gets stronger for every prize that you personally have taken. So if it's the 5 prize taken, like, I know Disneyland, but like, if it's the 5 prize like thing, you've got 1 prize left to take, this does 350 for a single energy. That's gonna knock out everything, and you just win the game off on the spot, right? But even at 4 prizes left, this is like 4 prizes taken, that's 280 damage, which KOs everything that isn't a stage 2 EX, right? Or like, you know, specifically tanky like a Copperaja. And so you can easily just like gust up a bench sitting EX or something and take your final 2, which is pretty good. In the early game for 2 Metal Energy, this does 220 and then does 30 damage to itself, so it can actually KO the evolving, or not evolving, but like the basic EXs for the most part, which is pretty solid. So like, I think there's something here, but it's not good enough for standard play, unfortunately. Metal just doesn't really have the right sort of acceleration stuff for this, and this being a stage 2, like even next set when we get the Metang, it's like better just to use the Dialga V-Star that's the stage 1. That's got a much better utility with this. Volcanion, I think, is like decently fine. It's a 130 HP single prizer with a 20 damage single energy attack that accelerates up to 1 fire to up to 2 of your bench Pokemon. Doesn't have to be other fire Pokemon, so that's always cool. And yeah, it's kind of like the Chi-Yu EX, but it accelerates 1 less energy and does like 80 less damage, but it also takes 1 less energy. So I think this is better, to be honest. And yeah, if you've got a heavy like early discard type thing, if you've drafted Squawkabilly for example, you could definitely do some early energy acceleration stuff between those two, and it would be pretty cool. Serena EX is intriguing. It's a free 10 HP Water Terra Pokemon. As a grass type, it is weak to metal because it's Terra Ice as opposed to actually Terra Water, so that's kind of cool. Like, it's a different weakness, right? It's not weak to lightning, so it's always a plus. Icicle Soul is the main reason this thing could even be remotely considerable. For a single grass energy, this puts damage counters on one of the opponent's Pokemon until its remaining HP is 30. Keep in mind, like I said, Jirachi only works on basic Pokemon's attacks, so this will not get stopped even if they have Jirachi in play. There's a couple of different ways you could consider using this, but Draft doesn't have access to the main one yet. The first way that you can consider this is with Radiant Sneasler and doing the Brute Bonnet stuff, because then you could auto KO the opponent's active, right? Poison them and put them down to 30 HP. Sneasler makes the opponent take 20 more damage from poison, and then they just get KO'd. So that's a funny haha moment, right? It's kind of like the old Super Fang stuff, but it's on a stage 2, so good luck with that, right? At least it's only for one of any energy. That's different from like the triple energy that tended to be used before. The other thing obviously is to set up the opponent's bench and then be able to do some really silly stuff with that. You could maybe do some Metachamp V things with this. Use that and like Radiant Zam or something to move a damage counter over. That's fun too, but ultimately I don't think it goes anywhere, which is a shame. Cool card though. Golisopod gets a couple of cards here, both a regular and an EX card. The regular one for a single water does 20 for each card in the opponent's hand. If you know they're going to play a Tinkaton deck, and we'll talk about the other Tinker here in a sec, then maybe this is okay. It's mostly just like an extra sort of thing if hand sizes get kind of wild, because the EX is the main thing here. 270 HP, water type, so it's weak to lightning. That's okay, I suppose, because Bat's Caliber is probably where you would use this, and that's weak to metal, so whatever. For 1 water and 2 colors, this does 170 damage with its awesome Swing and Skedaddle attack. I just love the name of it there. You have to discard an energy, which is gross, but if you do, switch this with one of your bench. So it keeps itself preserved. You could put up a chump blocker in the meantime, and I mean 170 is like fine. I don't think these are amazing by any means, but like these still KO non-EX Pokemon, so it really depends on what the power level is like at this time. Toxtricity EX is like actually worth noting because it's a fighting Terra Pokemon. Normally this is not a great thing for these, and there is a Hooper I'm not even talking about because it's a fighting Terra and it's a darkness thing, right? But this one's really good because of the Toxtricity from Obsidian Flames. That one for a Lightning and the Colors did like 50 plus 30 for each different type of Pokemon on your bench. And this is an inline way of getting a different type of Pokemon. It also just does a ton of damage too. For free Lightning Energy, 270. You've got to discard free Lightning from this, so it's like a one-shot wonder sort of thing. But like, that is a ton to go through. I don't know how you're accelerating to it because it's not a Lightning type, right? So you can't use Electric Generator on the Tox. But if you can gear up for that one extra like attack here, oh man, this thing is scary to think about. Zacian is kind of neat, mostly because of Iron Raw. We've seen these sorts of attacks all the time, and they do tend to be useful to have around. 1 metal for 30 damage, accelerate a basic metal from the discard to one of your bench Pokemon. Good setup stuff early on, extra acceleration if you need it for the metal deck, not too bad. Brave Blade is like fine, it does get a one-shot on most legendary basics at least, so there is that. Skeledirge is pretty good if you have the other one. It's a 330 HP Metal Terror, so it's actually weak to its own regular typing, which is kind of funny. But if you discard a basic Fire Energy from your hand, you get to increase your damage by 60 from like any one of your Pokemon to the opponent's active this turn. It does not increase bench damage, don't get too scared. Its own attack is like fine. For 2 fire it does 160 and it isn't affected by any effects on the opponent's active Pokemon. Remember, weakness and resistance and stuff aren't effects, so like weakness still goes through if you're fighting Chien-Pao and stuff like that. And that's kind of where I think this card like fits, right? It's really good against ice types, which is something that Skeledirge itself is not good against because it's weak to water, and this thing hits the ice type ones for weakness. So it could be pretty good there. But also just Incendiary Song makes your original Skeletor GX do 330 damage, which is absurd. So yeah, this ability does also stack, but it means that you need multiple Skeledirge in play for it, so good luck with that, right? Still, strong card. Garganical could be pretty good for draft. It's a 160 HP stage 2 this time, not 180, but it can accelerate a basic fighting from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon once per turn, and heal 30 damage from that Pokemon. So if you get multiple Gargs in play, you can accelerate multiple down, and there is actually a combination with one of the Treasures of Ruin that I'll talk about later on that I think is really good for this thing, so yeah. Ispathra has both a regular and an EX here. I'm not like sold on this card, but Pepper insists that it could be pretty good with the, if you pull enough of the Xatu and stuff. This might even be like rogue playable, the EX. I'll leave you to judge. Ispathra itself is a 120 HP stage 1 that if Tulip is in your discard pile does 140 for 2 psychic. It also is immune to damage and effects of the opponent's attacks the turn after you evolve it, which is pretty cool. So like you evolve it and then next turn the opponent can't touch this thing. I think it does actually... it's until the end of your opponent's next turn, so it's like, I'm not actually sure if this applies if it gets like gusted around. I'd have to double check on that. Usually these sorts of effects go away at that, but since you could evolve this on the bench and it would still work, I'm not sure if this would be a thing. The Tulip card itself puts 4 in any combination of Psychic Pokemon and Basic Psychic Energy from your discard pile into your hand, so it's respectable to have with Xatu, because if you have a ton of Psychic in the discard, you can accelerate, basically accelerate a bunch of them with the Xatu in play, or you could pick up the Xatus from the discard pile if you had to research them before. So it's a respectable card to play like 1 or 2 of in a Xatu based deck anyway, so I could see that. The EX is a Grass Terror, so it's weak to fire, so I guess that's the thing, but it has 260 HP and the Dazzling Gaze attack ability here, which makes it so that the opponent's active has to pay an extra energy to attack. Sometimes pretty disruptive. It's also grass type, so it hits Charizard for weakness, and that's like the big thing that you can do with it here, I think. For a single Psychic Energy, Cyball does 30 plus 30 for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. In the past, I would have called this absurdly busted, right? Because this is just stronger X-Ball. But the problem is, X-Ball doesn't really scale very well when it doesn't hit for weakness. And even back in the day, like X-Ball, so X-Ball's cool thing was like it could like hit for 2-shot numbers by only having 5 energy between the 2 Pokemon, which since most Pokemon were 3 energy attacking, it was like, yeah, respectable to do, pretty easy to manage. This though, I'm just not sold. If you have 2 Xatu in play and you attach 1 for turn as well, that's only 120 damage on your own end. Most opposing Pokemon, I guess with the ability, might end up having 3 energy attached in order to attack, possibly 4, and like, to get one-shot numbers on a lot of stuff, I think you need 8 energy, or 8, no, you need 7 because it's 30 base here, right? So you need 7 combined energy to get one-shots on like basic stuff. More if it's even something like itself, right? And I'm just not convinced you can get there fast enough. Obviously the fact that it's a grass type instead of a psychic type means that you can't use Gardevoir with this thing, and that's where it sort of loses me. I'm just not convinced. But I would be very willing to be proven wrong, and I think this is one of those that if you have like 3-4 Xatu plus the Ispathra EX line from Paldean Fates, I think you could maybe make it work. Tinkaton works specifically if you have Luminous Energy, and preferably the Tinkaton from Paldea Evolves, so it's a bit of a specific one, but it's a 130 HP stage 2 that does 180 damage for a single energy, providing that energy can pay both Psychic and Metal at the same time. Otherwise it's 2 energy that you need, and that's still respectable. Like if a Psychic and a Metal energy to do 180 is still good, but if you have Luminous or possibly Reversal energy, This thing is gross as far as how much damage it can do. And remember, the previous Tinkaton discarded a card to draw 3 once per turn, so it's its own inbuilt consistency too. It doesn't even need Revavroom to play. So I think this card is pretty good, but you need a specific setup from Paldean Evolved in order to consider it in the future. Bombardier EX is very, very good, I think, with Jet Energy specifically. It's a 200 HP EX colorless type that lets you use its 1 energy attack going first, which is very good because that attack is search your deck for up to 3 basic Pokemon, put them onto the bench. So you start with 1, it may or may not be Bombardier, but if it is, that's great. If not, Bombardier with Nest Ball. Jet Energy to the Bombardier, accelerate it into the push it into the active without even needing a switch, and then you get to search your deck for all your evolving stuff, and it's really good. It kind of basically is like a better version of something like Solrock or Squawkabilly that we had before, so cool. Orthworm is intriguing. It's a 140 HP metal type that for 1 metal energy does 20 damage and draws 2 cards. That might be good enough if you're still playing something like the Cyclizar from earlier on, but like specifically in a metal deck, doing a little bit of damage might actually end up mattering in the future, and 20 damage, draw 2 cards for 1 energy is pretty okay. It does have another attack as well, but you need 3 or fewer cards left in your deck, so good luck with that, but if you can manage it, 240 damage is pretty fun for 3 energy. Flamigo, I think this is the last time I get to talk about a Flamigo, because I don't think there's any more after this one so far. It's a 110 HP fighting type Pokemon this time, with the Combat Beak attack. 1 fighting, 1 colorless, 20 plus 20 for each of the opponent's benched Pokemon. So it's a basic for 2 energy that can hit 120 fighting type damage, which is pretty good. The reason this is important is again because of the Flamigo from Paldean Evolved, whose United Wings ability lets you search your deck for like 3 extra Flamigo when you bench it from hand and put them into hand. So like the ideal ratios I think would be 1 of this, 2 of the one from Obsidian Flames that does 60 snipe 60 for 2 Flamigo in play, and the one that searches them all out. It's pretty good. Tatsugiri, mostly noting it because of the Dondozo before. It may be a little bit power crept at this point, I don't know. It depends what else you've got, but this is the first chance we've had to get an extra Tatsugiri, so there is that. Technically it's like not awful. For 2 energy, search your deck for up to 2 cards, put them into hand, then you can switch this with one of your bench. I don't think we've got the synergy cards that work with this. We don't have like Fortin, and there's no double turbo or twin energy type equivalent for draft, so it's mostly because it's a name that we want it here. Iron Jugulus I think has got a lot of potential in the next set for Future Box. It's a 130 HP colorless Pokemon that takes effectively 3 energy for both of its attacks. Homing Headbutt is genuinely free energy, and it does 50 to 3 of the opponent's Pokemon that have any damage counters already on them. If you play Holucha, then you get 2 damage counters down already, so like, yeah, I think this is pretty okay. Could get some good setup with that. And then the Barrier Beam does take 5 energy to do 150, but if you have a Future Booster Energy Capsule attached, it does it for 3 of any energy instead. And Future Booster Capsule boosts the damage up to 170. As well as removing this thing's retreat cost. It's like, I think it's fine, but we just need the little bit extra from like Future Box stuff in the next set. But if you've got enough like switching I think is a bit difficult. Iron Valiant is not as good here, I don't think, because we don't have access to switch cards either. So like, I don't think you can really make a Valiant deck work with this, but there's a bunch of like snipe hits and things like that in the next set for Future, and this could like home in on those quite literally and make that pretty strong. So I think this is one to look out for. Iron Moth, I did briefly mention it in the mobility aspect part at the start, but its Heat Ray attack does 120 for 2 fire and a colorless. Can't use it in consecutive turns, but you can hopefully keep shifting it in and out. It is a basic Pokemon that does this much damage, so like for a single prize, I think it's respectable. And then the last thing from the Pokemon that we have to talk about are the Treasures of Ruin. They all have single prize cards now, and they all share the same general attack as for the first one here. For a single energy of their respective types, fire, fighting, water, and grass, you attach up to 2 basic energy of that type from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. So I think the most reasonable ones here are the Chien-Pao and the Ting-Lu. Partly because I think Chi-Yu gets outclassed by Volcanion, but you know, Ting-Lu fighting acceleration is a bit harder to do. This gives you a thing if you haven't got like Koraidon already, which is pretty good. And Chien-Pao, because you could use this as a single prizer in the Chien-Pao like Excalibur stuff if you have it, because their secondary attacks, like there's a couple of interesting ones here. We'll talk about Chien-Pao because I've got it here. 2 water and a colorless, 130, discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. So yeah, pretty respectable as far as single prize stuff goes. You can definitely KO a lot of other, you know, lower HP stuff with that. That's not too bad. Wo-Chien does 140, but it takes 3 grass and a colorless to do. It does make the opponent's attacks cost 2 more next turn, but only on the Pokemon that it actually damaged. So if it KOs something with this, then it doesn't even get that effect. This attack is garbage, unfortunately. Chi-Yu is like the next in terms of usefulness. Mega Fire of Envy is such a great attack name, but for 2 fire energy it does 50 plus 90 if any of your Pokemon were KO'd by damage from an attack during the opponent's last turn. So 140 for 2 fire, pretty respectable. Maybe with Mela this could be kind of good, because you could use Mela to accelerate the other fire, and then, you know, that's 140 on that turn for a single prizer. Pretty reasonable. But I think the best one is Ting-Lu, and this combines most with the Garganacl from this set as well. It's a bit hard to pull them all because both are hollows, but this does 220 damage for 3 fighting energy. The catch is that if it has 4 or more damage counters on it, it does nothing. But remember that the Garganacl actually heals you when you accelerate with it as well, which means that it is not impossible to bring this back into playable range. And at 140 HP, it's also quite likely that it just gets knocked out, right, after doing its one attack. But it's doing 220 for a single prizer, which is very powerful. On a basic 2, it's exactly the kind of thing that Garganacl wants to attack with, so I think there's potential for this. Also, like, you could use the first one to accelerate to a benched one, and then Turo Scenario to pick up this one and go to the benched one, attack with that, right? Doesn't even matter that the energy got discarded because the Garganacl can accelerate it back. So, yeah. I think there might actually be something there for draft. It's just a little bit too complicated, like low power, I guess, for regular stuff, because it is still you need like probably 2 of these in play, so it's difficult, we shall say. So depending on the power level of draft at this point, I think this could be really strong. Finally, we got the trainer stuff. Paldean Student, I do believe has a little bit of potential. Search your deck for a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, reveal it, put it into the hand. For each Paldean Student in the discard pile, search your deck for an additional Pokemon this way. If you can manage to get a couple of these discarded relatively early, or even just thinking about it, the further you go into the game, if you're playing like a stage 2 sort of setup type deck, then you can get a ton of Pokemon off of this, and it will just get stronger as the game goes on. But like, the rule box stipulation is definitely something that holds it back a bit, but think about all the stuff like Excalibur or Tinkaton or Xatu and things like that that you can actually use this with. There's a lot of single prize stuff in draft that would be really, really good, so I think this card is fine. Rika, maybe not so much, but again, maybe you need some very specific stuff. This comes out before the reprint of Paldean Fates, so it could be possible that your draft stuff is just not very good at outright draw and things at this point. You look at the top 4 of your deck, put 2 into the hand, and shuffle the other 2, put them to the bottom of the deck. So it's like Underground Expedition, but the opposite, you know, but like you take from the top instead of the bottom. Do we have something else like that? It was like Janine or something, right? That also did something similar to that in one of the previous gens. Like, again, it's fine. You aren't getting a lot of outright card advantage, but maybe some decks with like Revavroom don't necessarily need the card advantage that way, and it's just like you just want to look deeper into the deck. You don't always want to give up like a Rare Candy or something to play Research or Iono. So, yeah, there are situations where draft might force this to be used. Similar to that, Chantal. I really hope we never get to the point where we have to use this. But there is only one printing of Catcher and one printing of Boss, so it is possible. You flip a coin, and if heads, it's Boss. It switches your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot, and you get to choose, unlike the other stuff. If tails, you have to switch your own active. Now, in theory, there are a couple of places where this could be used, right? And it isn't just I didn't draft the enough gusting options and I really need something. There is a world where like being able to switch your own guy as a backup plan isn't necessarily that bad. But the problem is this is your supporter for turn. I really hope we never have to use this. But knowing RNG, somebody is gonna draft like maybe one boss and one catcher or something, and they're going to need something like this. Hopefully counter catcher would be the way to stop this from actually being a thing, but I'm noting it because you never know. And then we mentioned Tulip, so the final card to note here is Medical Energy. I'm really only noting this because it's another special energy that stuff like the Satitan or what's their face, Tinkerton could use. It provides the colorless energy, and if you attach it to one of your Pokemon, you heal 30 from that Pokemon. It's not impressive by any means, but if you need the fact of it is a special energy, you didn't pull that many from Paldean Evolved, but you do have enough of like the Tinkerton, or again Satitan needs special energy to do its bonus damage, I could maybe see playing a couple of this in like a Bat's Caliber deck or something, right? Bax Satitan could still be strong enough at this stage. That thing does 220 damage if I remember rightly. It's 80 plus 140, so it's yeah, it's still very powerful, but it needs special energy, and if you don't have them beforehand, this might be the one. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in here. This has been one of those weird ones where maybe it's because it's pre-rotation as well, and like half the stuff I want to play comes out in the next set in Temporal Forces. I've not really known what I want to do with this one, but it's not because there aren't playables. There are absolutely very good playable cards in this set, but it's in a weird spot, and I'm glad we don't have to play this for 6 months. Because I would probably just one-trick Gardevoir the entire time, I'll be real with you. If you've managed to make it this far, thank you very much for watching. This might well be the longest one of these I've done so far. Just goes to show how good the set is, right? Yeah, hopefully it has been interesting, and until next time, which probably will be the rotation in Part 1, so that's going to be another very long thing to do. Till next time, take care.